everyone, and welcome back to Book Talk with Cara. Today, I'm so excited to have my friend Melanie Dobson back as we're going to talk about her latest book, The Lost Story of Via Bell. Now, if you have watched earlier episodes with Melanie, you know she writes fantastic award-winning World War II stories. But for those of you who may not have experienced any of her books or watched or listened to one of the prior episodes, Melanie, I want to give you an opportunity to quickly introduce yourself before we dive into talking about this next book.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cara. I love talking to you. We've been friends for so long. And so this
Yeah.
is such a privilege to be able to be here talking to you about our book stuff, which we both love to discuss. I have been writing fiction for about 20 years now, or publishing fiction. I've been writing, fiction my entire life.
Yeah.
And I write mostly time slip stories. So I have the books that have the past timeline and the present timeline and mysteries typically, that stories that kind of weave together the past and present as the story goes by. And I'm writing now for a lot of Tyndale books, and I'm writing for a publisher named Kensington and some biblical fiction with guideposts. So I have a variety of things that I'm doing or working on right now.
I don't know how you keep that all straight, although having the biblical and the historical
Mhm.
mystery, that would help keep it kind of in
It's
the
very
different
different
buckets.
genres, right? That helps a lot to have it be so different.
Yeah. Now, this book, The Lost Story of Via Bell,
Mhm.
is a book that is another time slip. So you've
Mhm.
got scenes set in 1940, you've got scenes that are much more contemporary.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the what if that drives the story forward.
Yeah, this story was such a fun one for me to write. I have to tell you, it's what I've been wanting to do for a long time. And it's so like when you have that story that's been brewing for a while, you actually get the chance to actually tell it. It's just so yeah, exactly, right? You're like, oh yeah, it's been around for a while. So this was a story that actually stemmed back from my childhood, so way,
Oh,
way
wow.
back. I was a kid that loved to read, like so many of us were, that I we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and so I would take my bike every week to the bookmobile, which is, out in the country and the mile there and the mile back. And I loved romance, but as a, 12-year-old, the only romance author I was allowed to read was Grace Livingston Hill. And do you
Yes.
never? Okay.
Oh,
So
yes.
I
My
thought,
grandma had stacks of her,
did
and then
she?
Emily Loring, I think, was the
Okay,
other
yeah.
one.
Okay, yeah. No, Grace Livingston Hill was like, okay, my mom was like, you could read all of her stuff. And thankfully, Grace wrote a lot. So there was like a
Yes.
hundred novels that she had there. So I would go just load it up, come back, read, read, read. And then fast forward, all these years later, I got curious as I became a novelist, like what was Grace's story? What happened in her life? Come to find out, she had a really difficult life. Her first husband died after 7 years. He had a morphine addiction that he had gotten when he was prescribed the medication, sadly passed away, and her second marriage was a disaster. So her life was not romantic, all that to say. But her faith was deep, deep faith in God. Really fascinating story. And I was like, I want to write Grace's story. And so, it kind of stemmed
So
from
cool.
there. And then as I started studying other novelists in the era, the 1940s, Dorothy Sayers, and a little bit earlier, Agatha Christie and Virginia Woolf, and female authors from that era, there was sort of this common thread of some really challenging things that were happening behind the scenes,
Yeah.
inspiring their fiction. I was like, I want to write a story about a novelist in the 1940s, kind of loses her ability to write, like has this season of I can't find the words, I can't find the words, and then starts to write again, and then ultimately disappears. And so that's what happens to Via Bell. It's the lost story of Via Bell. She disappears. Fast forward to the 1990s, I have a screenwriter who's then trying to find out what happened to her.
Oh my gosh. So it sounds like it has almost overtones to that book about the disappearance of Agatha Christie, those days where
Yeah,
she disappeared.
yeah. It's a book I read after I wrote it, but yeah, Agatha Christie disappeared for 11 days,
Yeah, and
and
they still don't
talked
know.
about
What
it.
was she doing?
Yeah. I think she never talked about it.
Yeah, today I think it would be harder for us to disappear and just like poof, be gone.
It
But
would be more challenging for sure. Yeah.
yeah, but I love that. And it's so fun to think about, okay, there are these amazing women who wrote these incredible books that we're still
Mhm.
reading today. Because
Yeah.
I think, I've written all these books, you've written all those books. Yours are more
Mhm.
likely to still be read in 50 years. I don't know that mine will be. I just don't know. But to think, I wonder if Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers and Grace Livingston Hill would have thought that their books would still be being read,
Right.
100
Yeah.
years later.
Exactly. No, Grace had two daughters at home and she was taking care of her mother and she was ready to support her family, hence all of the books,
Yeah.
more than 100 novels. That's why she had so many books because she had to write. She was supporting her whole family.
Yeah, that's a different kind of pressure for sure.
Exactly.
So this is a split timeline, and you've got the two going on at the same time. How
Yeah.
did you pick the 2006 for the
Yeah.
second timeline? Why not just
Yeah.
put it in 2026?
Well, I wanted it to just be, yeah, exactly. Well, it's sort of like this trying to decide what era to do it based on like
Yeah,
technology. I don't want technology to be just so easy. I don't want her to be able to go on and find AI and find somebody really easy. She has to do a little bit of searching. So 2006 still, it wasn't quite as easy to get online and find someone or use your phone. You could still text, but it was a little bit more challenging. So I wanted to have the technology challenges. But also, and I can't tell you exactly why, because it relates to the 1940s story. So, there's sort of some things there about who in the story might still be around years later, that sort of
yeah.
thing you have to look at and
Oh,
relationship.
absolutely.
So it has to do both with modern day technology and then the relationships of people from the 1940s.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So that kind of answers part of what my next question was going to be, but was
Yeah.
there like a historical constraint
Mhm.
that limited what you could do with the story? Because like when I'm thinking about like the books I've written that were set during the 40s, um,
Yeah.
I love that time period because there was technology, but it's still
Mhm.
different enough from what we did today. But it's relatable in
Yeah.
ways that if you jump back to the 1820s or, further back in time, I'm like, I don't even want to imagine what it was like to live
Oh, yeah,
like during that
right.
time period, let alone have to dive into it to write. I mean, like I'll read a book set in the 1820s, but I don't want to have to live in that time period to write a book. So,
Exactly.
was there something though that as you were researching, you were like, oh, I wanted to do this, but now I can't because now I know that wouldn't have really been possible.
I don't know that there was anything that I couldn't necessarily do based on that timeline. However, I did have to redo my timeline because I wanted Simon, who's the one of the main guy characters in my book, I wanted him to be drafted. And so
Mm,
in order to do that, I had my timeline slightly off as far as when does the draft happen? When did it
yeah,
occur for World War II? And so I needed to switch things around. So I did. I got partway through my story and I was like, oh, I need to go back and redo that in order to
yeah,
hit. So, as a historical novelist, we want to be as historically accurate as we can. Now, some things we have to like maneuver a little bit or shape a little bit in order to make our story, fit in that era. But those distinct times, those distinct dates, I really want to make sure I get correct. And so, yeah, so
yeah.
I did have to redo a little bit of the story for that.
Yeah, I remember doing that in my first book because my it was
Mhm.
based in large part on my grandparents' love story,
Oh.
and he had been drafted 4 times, but then sent
Mhm.
home each time because he was the only son of a farmer. And
Okay.
so I really had to line it up, but I also had this pivotal event happening, and there was like all these dates that had to line up, and I was just like, ah! So I was
And I
like,
don't know if you're like me, but I don't do numbers. Like that stuff
yeah,
wigs me out. I'm like, oh, dates and numbers.
exactly. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how many flowcharts I have. It feels like there's
Yeah,
always one thing that's just like eek, slightly off. But
right.
I always hate that author note that says, well, I write fiction,
Mhm.
so versus the one that says, well, I did all this research and I did all this research. And then here's the one thing that I am going to say I'm a novelist on, and it's
Right,
fiction, y'all. And then I'm
exactly.
like,
Yeah,
okay, you played fair. And that
right.
works for me. So
No, yeah, I am absolutely. I do all of my research, trying to get it all as right as I can. But there's first of all, you can't like. I think one of my books, I had like an airliner that I needed to use that was like a month off the date that it was like built in the 1960s. There's like tiny things like that. But I do try and note it in the back, and if I have something big that I need to shift around a little bit.
yeah. And I think readers respect that because then they know,
Yeah,
okay, you were doing
right.
your research. You actually know when it happened because there's always that
Mhm,
one. There's always that one reader who is an
mhm.
expert on that
Right.
thing. And they're like,
Uh-huh.
you didn't do your research. I'm like, no, no, I did.
Yeah.
But I did all of this research
Mhm.
and it can't all marry up perfectly.
Right.
So, on that, we've
Mhm.
got these real historical constraints, but we also have
Yeah.
this story that we're telling. So, how do
Mhm.
you get the two to blend together? How do you make those
Ah,
decisions
that's a
when you
great
have to?
question. Yeah. So what I do, and everybody's process is different, and mine, changes up a little bit, but I try and immerse, like right now, my next book that I'm just now starting is set in Astoria, Oregon, which is a city, it's just a fascinating city with tons of histories in the 1920s. And so right now, I always go to my location if I can. So I went and spent a few days at Astoria, researched, and right now I'm buried. If I could show you my books, I'm just buried in books of Astoria. I'm reading, 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 doing tons of research. And I'll research for 3 or 4 weeks, just straight on research, and then I start the writing. And so my writing, the emotional journey is based on history, but I kind of have to let go of the facts a little bit as I write my story, just to immerse myself in the characters, immerse myself in their emotions, all of that. And then I come back. I keep all my research, and then I come back and I make sure it's all historically accurate at the end. But it's really hard for me to be like writing and be emotionally engaged and then checking on this fact and checking on this fact as I
Yeah.
go. I try and kind of separate those into two different processes, if that makes sense,
Yeah, it
as I
does.
work on my book.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's one of those that um, I don't know about you, but like I will drop footnotes in that say,
Mm,
here's my source if I have it top of head or, top of mind.
yeah,
Or I'll do the footnote for add research here or double check,
yes,
make sure I got it right. If I'm so in the flow that I'm like, I can't stop.
yeah,
And I don't want to lose whatever
mm,
I'm in or whatever I'm writing, whatever
right,
moment I'm in, so that I don't forget at the next stage to go back and make sure that, okay, did I get it right? I don't want to play loose and fast with the facts. But I also don't want to lose that emotional
yes.
experience. And so it's
Mhm.
hard to kind of balance the two.
Right. You have to, yeah, for me, I just have to kind of do them on two different tracks, or
Yeah.
I'll lose the momentum with the emotions and then, come back and do. And you're more formal than I am. I just like, I put a little XX and I just know that I have to come back at that point. So I just search for all that and I come back and work it out
But see,
later.
that works too.
Yeah.
So I learned early in my historicals that it was so much easier if I just filled at that time the Word document with the
Mhm.
citations so that then editors wouldn't be like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know where this research came from. You didn't really research. I would just be like, here's my source for this.
There it
Here's my
is.
source for that. Here's my source for that. And then
Mhm.
if there ever was a question, I could be like, oh yeah, this is where I found it from. But it
Right.
just eliminated so many questions from the
Brilliant.
beginning because they knew,
Mhm.
oh, Cara does her research. And I was like, yes, I do.
Yes,
So,
I do. Absolutely. That's awesome.
yeah. So, is there like, because you do all this research, is
Mhm.
there like some kind of setting detail or something
Mhm.
that you're like, oh, I wonder if readers will pick up on this? Or do you
Mhm.
really hope the setting's such a character, but that it's almost an immersive experience where readers don't even notice it because it's just so there? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I hope it's immersive. I mean, I hope my readers are so in the story. I'm trying to be so careful and add without going overboard, the sensory details that pull us in, the
Yeah.
sights, the smells, the sounds, I want all of that so that when the readers open the page, they just kind of are invited right in to the story, what they feel like they're there. So that's really important to me. The book is now called The Lost Story of Via Bell. But my original title was Moonflower Lake was the name of the book, Moonflower Lake, because moonflowers play such an important part in the story. And so I researched that like crazy just to make sure the setting would be, the details would be accurate. And so I have this lake, this small lake right outside Via Bell has this beautiful home and on the hill. And at the bottom of the hill is this small lake, and she has a moonflower garden in the fall that
Oh,
comes out, and so it glows, in the late summer, early fall. And then I have like the rickety rowboat, and I have the cemetery nearby. And so I do hope that readers will feel like they're right there. That's a really important piece of the story and the setting.
I love that. Yeah, I love when you kind of connect so much with a piece of it that you're like, oh, it's just special.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was there a moment in drafting this book where you were like, I just don't know if I can keep going, or this was a mistake? Because I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of my books, I'll hit a point where I'm just like, I'm a hack. This is the book where everybody's going to figure out I don't know what
Yeah.
I'm doing. And then I usually kill someone and keep going.
Mhm.
in the books, not in real life.
That's good to know. Thanks for
Yeah,
clearing.
yeah. Just an important caveat
I
there.
just kill somebody.
Yeah, just kill someone and keep moving. That's the beauty of suspense. You can do that and then it
Right?
keeps going. But,
Yeah.
and then usually in the editing process, at some point, I'm like, no, this is actually really good. But there's
Mhm.
always some point in the first draft where I'm just like, this
Yeah.
is it. This is the end of my
Right?
writing career.
Hmm.
Do
Yeah.
you have that? Or I know
I
you're just,
do.
you win so many more awards than I do that you
Okay,
probably never
that's
have
not
that
true. No,
experience.
I have it happen every book, and it's usually in the middle because I'm all so excited. You get the story going, and you're learning your characters, and you have your big questions. And then I used to say the middle was just like sledging through like cement, like wet
Yeah.
cement. Like I just feel like I just can't. It's terrible, and I just can't get through it. I did read Jim Scott Spell's books, Writing from the Middles, which is a super great resource, and that really helped me in my writing process to be able to embrace the middles and not just like barely make it through. But yeah, I have those moments in every book, different sections of it. And then like you, I typically get to the end and then I'm like, oh, it is okay. I like it.
I made
It's yay.
it.
And then shoo. And then but sometimes it takes a couple rounds of edits before I get to the point that I'm like, okay, because I want to like the story first and then hope that my readers, of course, like
Yeah.
it. But if I don't like it, if I'm like, oh, this isn't working, I know at that point that I really need to do some work. And thankfully, we do a job that we can go back and edit and edit and edit. If it's
Yeah.
not working, we can go back and rework it. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. That's such a great point. It's like it can not be done
Yeah.
until the deadline. And then
Yeah,
it
right,
has to be done.
exactly.
And
You
even
can't
then,
have
though,
days that it's
we get to
bad.
edit it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the next day could be better. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
okay. Now, I have a question that I've started asking that I
Okay.
like. And I don't know if your book has this, but is there like if a book club was reading your book,
Mhm.
is there a question that you would
Hmm.
really love to be the fly on the wall listening to them discuss? Something about your
Ooh.
book that you're like, oh, I really wonder how they would
Yeah.
interact with this part of the book.
How they would interact. That's a really great question. I trying to think of how to answer that without giving away my
Yeah.
plot, right? Since it's a mystery. Um, I would be curious to know. I think Via, my main character, Olivia, is her Via Bell is her pen name. Olivia is the name in the book. And she makes some really hard decisions, bad decisions, even based on how she sees herself. She's
Mm,
middle-aged, she's an author who can't find her words for a season, and she's herself lesser than because she is not a literary writer. She's very much a romance writer, and in an era that F. Scott Fitzgerald was writing and Virginia Woolf and sort of these bigger, more
yeah.
literary authors. And so she's looked down on in the literary world. And so just trying to find herself and who she is in God and what her calling is, and then making some bad decisions based on how she sees herself, I think is what. And so I would love to just hear what readers who are reading the book, what they think about that. Do they identify with that? Or they're like they see her as, um, I don't know, somebody unbalanced or something? I don't know. I would just be curious
Yeah.
to see what their perspective is on that.
I love that. Is she an anti-hero or someone they can really
Yeah,
relate to and all those
exactly.
pieces? Yeah,
Yeah, and kind of both within the story, based on her choices.
absolutely. Okay, now for the lightning round.
Okay,
3 words to describe your book.
3 words. Okay, mysterious. I'd say lost, and then ultimately found.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Okay, and readers who love X will
Yeah.
also love my book because.
Yeah. If they like time slip stories about old houses or, kind of mysteries like Kate Morton or Amanda Dykes, those sort of
Yeah.
authors, I think they will like my story.
Oh, I love those comparisons. It
Yeah.
immediately gives me an image or a
Does it give you a
vibe.
picture? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And then do you have a favorite line
Oh, I do. I do. Okay,
or scene?
okay. Um I have this line that Harper, the contemporary character says, the best way to honor a storyteller is to tell her story. And that's where she does. So that's the whole heart of the story is I wanting to tell the novelist story, the storyteller's story and honor her in that way.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I can see that on a sticker. So, all right, Melanie, it's been so fun to have you on to talk about your new book.
Hmm.
And where can readers interact with you and learn more about this book and all your others, The Lost Story of Isabel and all your other novels?
Yeah, my website is the best place. So it's just melaniedobson.com, DOBSON.com. And then signing up for the newsletter there is a great way to get my more information about my books. I send it out about once a quarter. And social media, I'm on, Facebook is where I am primarily. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on today. And I can't wait for people to discover this book and all of your others. It was great to have you on again.
Thanks so much.